Good afternoon, everyone. Hey, we're going to try and get started back up again. Thank you guys. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you for making our quick transition into our lunch keynote. My name is Arlen Burgess. I'm the Associate Director for Operations and Strategic Initiatives at the Data Science Institute here at UVA. And as Dawn mentioned this morning, this is also my third Datapalooza. Someone this morning asked whose first Datapalooza it was. I was going to ask whose third Datapalooza. Anybody been to all three? All right. Good. All right. Awesome. Well, one of the great things about this event is it was just sort of a groundswell of wanting to see what was going on, right? Wanting to understand what kind of data-driven research was happening across grounds, give people an opportunity to collaborate and really come together. And so with that, we have grown every year, and that's very exciting. And under the, while I'm talking about growing every year, we do still have to get everyone in a seat while the programming is going on. So anybody standing in the back, we can't do that for fire code reasons, so if you could please find a seat, that would be awesome. Great, and I thank everybody for being flexible. For those of you that had been watching the evolution of the agenda here, we had not originally planned a lunch keynote, and we had to move a few things around, and so I thank you for your flexibility. That being said, we do invite you to eat, so please do eat during the keynote. And I also thank our lunch keynote speaker for being flexible as well. We have a real treat for you today for the lunch keynote. Her name is Jo Madda, and Jo is currently the Creative Strategy Manager at Code Next at Google, where she works to create free computer science education programs for Black, Latino, and Hispanic students. And this is a new position for her. She's been there 6 weeks. So new position at Google, and before that, she was 4 years at EdSurge, where she was the Director of Audience Development and the Senior Editor, and EdSurge is an edtech news organization. Jo was one of the 4 founding Education Entrepreneurship Fellows at the Harvard Innovation Lab while she was piloting an educational media startup. And in 2016, she was featured on the Forbes 30 Under 30 list for her work that she did at EdSurge. On a more personal note, Jo is also a close personal friend. We were college roommates at one point. And that being said, I took the liberty of picking her up last night at the airport, where she arrived at about 2 a.m. So we give her a special thank you. I know Mary Jo very well, and she's had a couple of Diet Cokes, so I know she's ready to go. Oh, she's had a Diet Coke and a Diet Pepsi, so we've covered all of our bases. She flew here today from Chicago, where she spoke as a part of the TEDx series just yesterday. So she's making the rounds, doing some really exciting work, and so will you all please join me in welcoming Jo Madda.
Is this on? Yeah? Oh, I got to turn it on. I knew I was going to forget that. Does that work now? Wonderful. Thank you, Arlen. If any of you are curious as to what our college experience was like together, feel free to talk to me afterwards. I could shock you with some of the stories that I have. It's a real pleasure to be here. This is actually the second time that I've spoken at UVA, and I love coming to this campus, and it's so nice to actually see a fall because we don't have that out in California. So I was mildly freaking out when I saw the trees turning colors because I forgot that that's a thing that happens when you have seasons. So thank you for that. I'm also excited to go get Moe's Barbecue later. Does anybody else know Moe's in here? Yeah? Is that the best barbecue place in Charlottesville? I see some mixed reactions. Okay, so if you have a better recommendation, please let me know after because I would love to hear. So I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about the world of education. What's up? You want me to, oh, I have to put in my password. Can they see me putting in my password? This is a Google-issued computer. I don't know if you saw that, but major privacy concerns, if you will. All right, here we go. So I'm here to talk to you a little bit about education and the way that data practices have both impacted it, but also perhaps negatively affected it. I've had a lot of different roles in my time at EdSurge, at Google, as a teacher, and so I've seen data consumed in a lot of different ways. And the way I usually like to start my talks off is with a little reminder for all of you. So I wrote this article a couple years ago. It's one of the most popular articles I've ever written, and there's nothing I hate more than when speakers have crappy PowerPoint slides that are covered in text. Because learning science says that if you are reading the text while I'm speaking, there's too much going into your head and you don't remember everything. So, as a group, I would like you to hold me accountable. If you see too much text up on these slides during this presentation, I want you to find me after this and berate me profusely. Okay? Do we feel good about that? Raise your hand if you're tired of seeing slides that just have lots and lots and lots of text on them. Yeah, I feel you. Chris, I don't want to make you feel uncomfortable, but he's rewriting his slides right now. Great, excellent. Rising to the challenge. So for those of you that don't know, this is an apple. The apple oftentimes is associated with the public education system in America, and really any education system in America. Yet despite how plump and red and juicy it is, personally, I think it does a poor job of reflecting how students are actually performing when you compare them with 71 other groups of 15-year-olds across the 72 developed countries that are tested every 3 years by the PISA exam. As you can see here up on the board, US students, as most recently issued by the 2015 PISA, are performing 35th in math, 24th in reading, and 25th in science. Considering that we are such a world superpower, to me that's pretty dismal. And the bigger thing that concerns me, especially in the role that I have at Google now, is that 65% of the jobs our kids will have in the future don't actually exist yet. I can guarantee you that a number of you in here probably hold jobs now that did not exist about 10 years ago, nay, 5 years ago, maybe even 3 years ago, because that's how rapidly the job market is changing. Now, I see a lot of people talk about the realities of how data can fix all of our problems. We just need to do a better job of tracking how students are doing and, just keep testing them, test, then they'll be more ready for the PISA exam. But I don't necessarily know if I feel that way, because the way that I've seen data consumed and used and implemented, it can be both a real positive and potentially a real deterrent from what I consider to be real learning. And so today, before we get to the Q&A, what I want to do with you is share some of my personal experiences being in all these different fields of education, to share with you some of the issues that I think some of you in this room might either be tackling or maybe should tackle going forward. Because I've heard that y'all are pretty smart. So I'm hoping that you can help me and some of my friends out. Now, the first role I ever had in my life was as a teacher. I was a 6th and 7th grade math and science teacher. And it was quite the experience, I'll let you know. Then after that, I decided that I was sick and tired of reading all of the journalism stories that basically said that teachers were terrible. So I decided to go into education journalist, and I joined EdSurge, an edtech news organization out in the Silicon Valley. And then as Arlen said 6 weeks ago, I joined Google. And what I'm doing for Google is that I'm a member of the Code Next team, and Code Next is looking to essentially create free, live computer science education programs for kids of color. We currently have 2 locations, one in Oakland and one in New York, but we're looking at expanding to Atlanta, Austin, Chicago, and potentially also Charlottesville. So that's sort of where my history goes. But I'm going to take you back, first off, to my years as a teacher. And we're just going to forget about the other 2 for now, because we'll get to those later. These are some of my students. I spent a number of years teaching in 2 very different places. First, when I taught, I was down in Houston, Texas. Anyone here from Houston? Anyone here from Texas? All right, a few more, great. So I taught in Houston, Texas. I was a 6th grade science teacher. I taught in a charter school called KIPP. It's the biggest charter system in the country. And then further down, you see the kids here in the right. When I was ready to go into more of an administrative role, I actually moved to Los Angeles and taught in a Catholic school system down there. I also simultaneously taught 7th grade math because we lost a math teacher, and as some of you may know, if you're married to or know teachers, that's a common thing, so I taught 7th grade math while I was there. I became absolutely obsessed with my kids. I love everything about teaching. It is one of the most incredible careers out there. It's also one of the hardest careers out there, but to this day, I think it's probably the most rewarding thing I've ever done. Now, data definitely held a huge role in my life as a teacher. Some of you may remember from when you were in schools, or if you have your kids in school now, multiple choice testing is very common. It's something that is done on a weekly, monthly, annual basis. And in some ways, data was really positive in my life because I liked doing what I call exit tickets, where you give kids small quizzes at the end of every week to track and see what they've learned, and then you can adjust your teaching accordingly. But there's a bigger part of data usage in the classroom, which I didn't appreciate, and that was high-stakes standardized testing. As you can see here, this is just a small sampling of some of the national exams and statewide exams that students are currently taking across the country. Up in the corner, you'll see TAKS, Texas Assessment of Knowledge and Skills. That was the test that my students had to take, except that there was one exception. So I told you I was a 6th grade science teacher. In the state of Texas, 5th through 8th grade math is tested, 5th through 8th grade language arts is tested, 5th through 8th grade social studies is tested, but science is only tested in 5th grade and 8th grade. And so because of that, I was in a very unique position because I actually got the opportunity to not be driven by the standardized tests. Let me paint you a picture. In about March of each year that I was teaching, my principal asked me to stop what I was doing and start reteaching math concepts that the kids were struggling in. And I said, well, what the heck? I have a whole curriculum that I have to do. But her response was, it doesn't matter. We need to perform well on these tests because we need to get funding to be able to survive going forward. Because that is the reality of a lot of these standardized tests, is that many of them, your performance is attached to the funding that you get as a district or a school, which can be extremely frustrating. And that's also true in the charter schools. It's all about money at the end of the day. But in my case, I didn't necessarily have those same limitations because I wasn't forced to focus solely on a test for science the rest of the time of the year. And so what I was able to do really was to expand my curriculum and do a lot of really interesting and creative projects with my students to get them to think more broadly about the concepts that they were learning. And this also happened in my Catholic school environment because Catholic schools also don't do long, intense, standardized testing at the end of the year. Obviously, they're private, they have a different model. But it really freed me up as a teacher to be a lot more creative with the ways that I was implementing instruction. So I'm just going to brag for a little bit because this is one of my favorite projects I ever did with my students. When we were learning about proportions, I basically gave each of the kids a specific proportion, and they either had to blow something up or shrink it down. So here you see a big Lego piece. You see a giant, I think that's a Twix bar, and a Hershey's milk chocolate. Sadly, I was hoping that he would actually fill the entire thing with a bar of chocolate. I joked about docking him points for that, but I didn't. That would have been wrong. But the kids really enjoyed this. And the best part about it was that, the grading did come later. There was a rubric assessing this, but there wasn't this obsession with the number. At the end of the project, I asked the kids what they enjoyed the most, and it wasn't that they enjoyed, necessarily the acquiring of an A, because a lot of the kids did really well, but they enjoyed the process, and they enjoyed the application of the math concepts that we had learned in my classroom. All right, now, I taught for a while. I loved teaching, but like I mentioned before, I started seeing a lot of these articles in newspapers that basically made teachers out to be, the worst eyesore of all time. That, they were bringing down public education, that it was terrible. And don't get me wrong, I've seen some pretty terrible examples of teaching out there, but I've also seen some incredible examples of teaching. And so I decided to lend my skills to a news organization. And of all the places I chose to move to become a journalist, I went to the Silicon Valley, which had a completely different narrative from what I was used to hearing about. The belief was basically that technology would fix everything, and these were some of the headlines that I started seeing when I spent my time in the Silicon Valley. 3 ways technology can fix education. The Silicon Valley billionaires remake America's schools. Artificial intelligence spike in education. Woo, this is the answer that we've all been searching for. Okay, well, not so much. I've seen great examples of tech. I've seen poor examples of tech. But let me talk about the good examples for a second, because data holds a very, very specific piece when it comes to the producers of education products. So EdSurge is an organization that was founded in the Silicon Valley in 2011 by Betsy Corcoran, who is a former Forbes editor. And she created it when her own students, her own children, experienced the ups and the downs of technology in the classroom. When I joined, they were looking for someone that had a teaching background to really be able to figure out how teachers were using tech with students. Technology is certainly a big focus of what we wrote about. We wrote about a lot of the different products out there, about who was getting funding. We wrote about how teachers were implementing things. We wrote about projects that students did that incorporated technology. But we also wrote about data. And while I was there, I learned some incredible things about the importance that data has in making edtech products work well for students. I also learned that there are some incredible edtech products out there that make assessment a lot easier. You don't necessarily have to wait until the end of the year for a big, high-stakes standardized test to know how your students are doing. You can do tiny little things every single day to figure out exactly how they're performing. One of my favorite edtech products of all time is this product called Kahoot. Has anyone ever heard of Kahoot? Oh, Kahoot is the best. Honestly, I would play it by myself at home if that wasn't such a weird, uncomfortable thing to do. So, products like Kahoot allow you to do these quick, live assessments in class while you're there with your students, and they make your life as a teacher a lot easier because you don't have to sit there constantly grading. So assessment can have some really incredible implications when you have a tech tool that supports you. Now, at the same time, however, one of the constant narratives that I saw when I was working at EdSurge was the reality of these massive data breaches that were starting to happen across the United States, both at the higher ed level and at the K-12 level. This was an article that my old coworker, Jenny Abamu, wrote recently. Massive data breaches, billions in wasted funds. Who is holding edtech vendors accountable? Now, this has become a lot more of a common story recently because as more and more student data gets loaded up into these repositories and kept and used, there's also a lot more opportunities for hackers to break in. In fact, this story that Jenny wrote was in reaction to this other headline that happened to probably one of the most popular edtech tools on the market. It's a learning management system called Edmodo that allows teachers to interact with their students online. It's almost like a mini Facebook for teachers and students. But a hacker broke in and actually stole 77 million Edmodo user accounts. We're talking really private data. We're talking email addresses, physical addresses, student names, other private pieces of student information. I mean, this was a really big deal. And Edmodo is probably one of the most popular edtech tools on the market, so we're talking all parts of the country, all parts of the world even, from K all the way up through 12, and then also probably teacher data as well. So there's definitely some issues that come into this when we're talking about the way that edtech tools are utilizing and housing all of this data. There could be a better way to do this. But that's not the only thing, and I actually have a little bone to pick with Edmodo because I am a little frustrated with what that edtech tool has been able to garner. So the other users of data pretty frequently in the Silicon Valley are the funders who are actually giving money to these edtech companies to allow them to grow. Edmodo has been one of the most prolific edtech companies when it comes to raising money. They've been around for a pretty long time. I think they've been around since about 1999. But they've raised all the way up from a pre-round to a Series D, which in the business we actually usually refer to as the series of death, because at that point, if you're still having to raise money, child, you are not ready to make money. You have not figured out what you're doing yet. But Edmodo, being the brilliant pitchers that they were to investors in the Silicon Valley, kept using one very specific data point when they went to funders and said, we need more cash. They kept talking about the number of students that they had on their platform and the growth that that platform had started to garner. Now, as wonderful as that statistic is, and as much as it demonstrated that Edmodo as a free product was certainly achieving popularity in the space, there was a really big problem. The data set that they presented to the investors was not necessarily the right one for sustainability over time. A lot of investors, especially in the early 2010s, when they heard we've got multi-million numbers of users. They got really excited. They thought, oh, you can get acquired, maybe you'll be able to get bought out, et cetera, and then we'll make our money. But the truth of the matter is that an edtech company is not a Facebook. It's not a Snapchat. And so despite the fact that Edmodo has so many users, they haven't figured out how to fundamentally scale and make enough money to generate their returns back to them. And so all of that funding that went into keeping them afloat is now basically being flushed down the drain. Now, I've been a teacher, I've been a journalist. So I have consumed data and I've written about data. But now, in my work at Google, I'm trying to figure out how to track it. And this is hopefully something where some of you can come in. Because part of the reason I was willing to come keynote today was A, I love Arlen. B, I love barbecue. C, I love UVA. But D, I'm also hoping that some of the collective wisdom in this room can offer me some ideas. So I mentioned this statistic before, right? 65% of our jobs that our kids will have don't exist yet. This is a little terrifying to me, because when you dive even deeper into this, what you discover is that so many of those jobs are likely going to have some connection to technology, specifically computer science. But coding is not something that's fundamentally taught in schools yet. I think that some of the universities like yourselves are starting to figure this out. You know, you've offered up some opportunities for students to go to boot camps outside of the university to get training on coding. But K-12 seems to be pretty slow on the uptake. Despite the fact that the Department of Ed got all of that money from some private companies a couple of weeks ago, I don't know if we're actually going to see that all come to fruition, because there's no set of standards that drives schools to actually make time to teach computer science. So that's where organizations like Google are coming in, because we see the issue and we sort of want to tackle it head on. For Code Next, the initiative that I joined that's about 2 years old, we're specifically focusing on Black and Hispanic tech leaders because there's such a dearth of them, especially in the Silicon Valley, but really across all parts of the country. We see very few Black and Latino students going into computer science. We see few Black and Latino adults becoming leaders in tech organizations. And the lack of diversity is something that's extremely concerning. But at the level that we're at, as I walk into the physical spaces that we have and I see these kids on computers learning how to code, I think to myself, how do you track what they're doing now and follow them along to figure out what the arc of success is that will get them to the place that we want them to get? Which basically means being adaptable and being able to have the skills that they're going to need for those jobs that don't exist yet. Right now, my team and I are trying to figure out exactly how to create a data dashboard that allows us to track these skills in a way that brings them together for the ultimate goal of success, which really, for us, equates to high school students going into computer science at the higher ed level. There are a lot of different ways to track this. Hard skills is what we in the education business refer to things like actual coding, reading, writing, like things that you could probably test relatively easily through a multiple choice exam. Soft skills are something that are a bit harder to track. We're talking about leadership, collaboration, the ability to do public speaking. They're a bit more nebulous, and so because of that, a lot of schools and districts, as well as organizations like Google, don't really have ways to track that and data specifically correlated to that. I mean, how do you track whether a student is collaborative? That's sort of a hard concept to quantify. And even when you do qualify it, well, how do you actually get that across to the people that are really numbers-based? And then finally, the last thing that I want to bring up is social capital, because this has been the most recent thing that's entered our lexicon while we've been talking about the data practices that we're going to need to instill in the program. So social capital, for some of you who may know this, is the concept that social relationships have economic benefit. If you think about how you are here today, I can almost guarantee you that a major part of that was because of someone you knew who either helped you get an opportunity that gave you the tools you needed to get to this place. Maybe you knew someone at the university that helped get you a job. I know there are some grad students in here. Social capital may relate to the other kids that you went to school with before you got here, the collective intelligence and ideas that came across when you were together. Now, social capital is something that we've been talking about a lot because what we've recognized is that in order to really help our students get to the point that they need to be, we're going to have to figure out both how to deliver on and assess the development of their social capital. I mean, when I think about myself, the array of communities that I've had the privilege of being a part of have not only made me who I am today, but I would venture to say that they have single-handedly gotten me to the point of working for a Fortune 500 company, of being able to live on my own, of being economically independent. I mean, and they don't necessarily all have to be higher ed institutions. I went on a trip to Israel recently, and I met a big group of people, and some of those folks have actually given me some of the tools that I've been using in my current role at Google. I've gone to edtech meetups in the Silicon Valley, but I've also gone to edtech meetups in New York, in Austin, in Chicago. And I've met an incredible array of people who have given me some concrete ideas that I've applied to the work that I do now. You know, even in the brief years that brief weeks that I've spent at Google, I can already tell that the organization itself is such a rich and diverse environment, not just for talent, but also for ideas. And so we think to ourselves a lot, how are we going to assess and track this for our kids? Social capital is something that, unbeknownst, I think, to a lot of people consciously, can really impact how you get to the point you are at today. And so what we're trying to figure out is, how do we get our kids to that and assess them along the way to make sure that they're on that track? All right, I've delivered a lot of information at you, and judging by about 75% of the room, I'd say that several of you are kind of overwhelmed and sort of like, ugh, oh my God, there's a lot to deal with. And the answer to you is yes, there is a lot to deal with. That's part of the reason why it's hard for me to sleep at night sometimes, because it drives me bananas knowing how many things there are in education to tackle. You know, I did Teach for America, and Wendy Kopp, who is the founder of Teach for America, has this motto that she says, where she goes, one day, all kids. And I think to myself, whew, that one day feels like it's a long way off, like centuries. What are we talking about? But at the same time, I follow in the steps of one of my idols, Larry Cuban, who's a professor at Stanford University. He's probably the most prolific education professor we've ever had, in addition to Linda Darling Hammond, who is also a professor at Stanford. He described himself to me single-handedly as a die-hard skeptic, but a constant optimist. And that's how I see myself now. Because as skeptical as I am about some of the edtech products I've seen, about some of the practices with standardized testing out there, I still believe that when we get lots of smart people in a room, like all y'all, and we talk about these issues, we can come up with great solutions together. So I'm going to throw a couple things out there at you. And let's just breathe in and breathe out, because don't worry, it's not going to be too overwhelming this time. But I want to see if I spark any ideas for innovation or thought in this room. And if you do have ideas, I want you to bring them to me, because I want to help transfer those back to the people that could potentially use them, or I want to connect those of you in this room who are interested with the folks in the Silicon Valley who you might be able to mind meld or work with. So let's start out with teaching. What sorts of best data practices could we improve on to help teachers and administrators? Well, I think that that's going to relate to culture. I'll get to that in a second. When it comes to edtech products, what are some of the things that we need to improve on? We're going to talk about tools. And when it comes to companies and organizations, nonprofits trying to figure out how to quantify those less measurable elements, how do we deal with that? Well, let's start off with culture. All right, so when it comes to teaching, the thing that I think we need to do is become more data-informed and less data-driven. Has anybody ever heard this before? I see a couple of you nodding. Has anybody ever said this before? All right, has anyone ever said this and people are like, whatever? It's okay, you don't have to, I don't want to get anybody fired today, that's all I'll say. So it's a culture piece. Data-informed means that data doesn't just drive everything that you do in the classroom. You don't feel like your job is constantly on the line because you're not hitting the metrics that the state standardized test has dictated that you have to get to. So let me give you an example of that. This terrifies me. The idea of students focused solely on standardized tests is something that drives me bananas. Because to me, we're not creating students that are prepared for the 21st, 22nd, and 23rd century jobs that are coming down the pipeline. What we're preparing them for is to be robots. And if the Matrix is any indication, there will be plenty of robots coming down the pipeline anyway, so we don't need to add to that with human robots. But we can definitely do better elements of encouraging our educators through professional development to use data in ways that informs them rather than drives them bananas. So take, for example, an exit slip. This is a practice that I think some teachers use, but I would encourage those of you who know teachers, who talk to teachers, to show them how to use. An exit slip is pretty simple. You give it to kids at the end of the day or the last 5 minutes on a Friday, and it's a quick way to assess whether or not they've gotten the concepts. You can also ask them, are there things that you want to learn more about? Kind of get a temperature check about whether they're enjoying what they're learning in your class. And you can also get them to think about questioning. The one thing that drives me bananas about exit slips when I see teachers use them is I hate when they only ask kids about the content that they've learned. How about how they feel about the content? How about what they want to know more about? There's so many more dimensions to a student's mind than simply understanding whatever content they absorbed. And by the way, if you want to know if a student knows content, give them a computer and just ask them to Google it. Because that's how the majority of moments that I need to get content knowledge come about as. I just go and I Google it. I don't necessarily need to know it, but boom, now I have the answer. Now the second point, which I mentioned before about tools, relates to creating a safe, centralized location where data connects. Raise your hand if you've heard of the term interoperability. That is a buzzword, if anything. I mean, I hear this all the time in the Silicon Valley. But especially in the education technology world, this is absolutely crucial. When I was a journalist, and I would go into classrooms, and I would go to districts, and I would talk to educators, I would ask them, what drives you crazy about the tools that you're using? And 9 times out of 10, 9.9 times out of 10, they would tell me, I'm getting all this data from all over the place, and I can't track all of it, and I just want it to go to one place so that I can see how it looks in comparison with one particular student. There are efforts out there trying to get to this point, but the efforts are very few and far between. And a major reason for that is because interoperability is not necessarily a sexy concept. So you don't see big Silicon Valley billionaires like Mark Zuckerberg shelling out the dough to make this happen. But in my opinion, there's a huge dearth of interoperability standards and tools that allow all of the different technologies out there to fit in together and spit out reports that teachers can actually use. And the way that I see it, I used this triangle before. I actually had this in my TED Talk yesterday, but there's got to be sort of a fundamental connection where you have the data and the technology linked, but you also consider the schools and the educators in that. Because the other big problem that I've experienced a lot is that when the data gets pushed out of whatever technology you're looking at, it's oftentimes very hard to parse. And if I can be honest with you, when I used to go home at the end of the day at 9 p.m. at night, which is the reality for a lot of educators out there, the last thing that I had the energy to do was comb through pages and pages of data. So making it as actionable and as easily consumable to teachers and administrators for that matter is something that we have to do a better job of. And when I said safe, you notice that I put the word safe here? This should not be happening. This scares me because when you're talking about data breaches this big, you're talking about compromising someone's safety. This was a huge issue that happened last year where the UC Berkeley system basically got hacked and 80,000 people had their information thrown out there. And, again, higher ed institutions are no more perfect than K-12. Trust me, for every UC Berkeley article that I've seen, there are 12 schools and districts across the country that have had the exact same issue. But we can do better about this. We can invest in better safety practices and better anti-hacker systems that keep that data from being exposed to the masses. Okay, and now the last thing, thank you for moving that, I appreciate that, because that was definitely very most important word there. In my work at Google, and I've only been there for 6 weeks, so take this with a grain of salt, I've seen the importance of tracking new and less defined measures of success. Because well, actually, you know what? Let's just see. Raise your hand if you've taken a standardized test in the last 5 years. Okay, put your hand down if you're a grad student. So no grad students. Raise your hand if you've taken a standardized test in the last 5 years. Okay, now, hands down. Grad students, raise your hand if you took the GRE or the GMAT in the last 5 years. Okay, there we go. I didn't anticipate that, but I'm glad that you were paying attention because that means that you haven't gotten into a food coma from lunch, which is fantastic. Now, as wonderful as standardized tests may be, and some people love them, I have not taken a standardized test outside of the GRE when I went to grad school for any job I've ever had. Ever. Ever. So why are we forcing students to take so many standardized tests? And why aren't we figuring out how success looks when it's correlated to other skills? What I'm doing right now, a standardized test could not tell me if I'm good at this. A standardized test could not tell me if I'm able to deliver a message to a group of really intelligent people at the University of Virginia. So why aren't we figuring out how to measure these other forms of success for students? Some of you may recognize, this is the illustrious Ken Robinson, well, half of his face, that is. Sir Ken Robinson delivered the most popular TED Talk in history. I think at this point it's garnered over 12 million views or something like that, but I always love reminding myself that the most popular, most viewed TED Talk of all time relates to education. And even more, that it relates to this concept. Because what Ken Robinson talks about is the fact that when we have standardized tests in the classroom and we focus only on the quantitative, we're losing out on all of the beautiful other ways that we're tracking student progress. And I'll say one final thing, because I also feel like this is an important thing to note, especially for those of you that have kids and for those of you that are students too. I imagine you might be doing some of this already, but I encourage you to do even more of it. We need to encourage our students to be responsible consumers of their own data. Adults do a lot of the work, but I will tell you, it terrifies me when I imagine some of my students, going online and just throwing their data out to the world. That really scares me. Social media is something that has become rampant in our society, and we need to help students understand where that data is going and who's consuming it. We also can encourage our students to do a better job of self-assessing themselves so that they're aware of how they need to improve. This is another exit ticket that I actually found when I was interviewing a teacher up in North Dakota. She's one of the best teachers I've ever seen, and she has students do a self-assessment emoji exit ticket every single day. Now keep in mind, she is a kindergarten teacher. She doesn't teach 12th graders. I feel like if 12th graders saw this, they'd probably throw up all over it because they think it's really stupid. But for kindergartners, asking them a simple question like, how are you feeling? Do you feel how this guy looks? Or do you look like you have sunglasses on right now? Or are you feeling like okay? It's a good basic way to show younger kids how to self-assess their feelings and to help them think about what they enjoyed about the learning experience, what they didn't enjoy about the learning experience. Guys, we can't turn our kids into emotionless human beings. They need to learn to control their emotions as much as they need to learn to control their data. And that's something that I hope, and I pray that more and more teachers are doing across this country, because I fundamentally believe in it. Now, I've said a lot, and we're also going to get to the Q&A in a second. But I would say that for today, the charge that I want to give to you is this. I want you to share your best data practices. And I don't just mean with me. I mean share your best data practices with each other, share them with folks that you know who work in the education sector, share them with your children, share them with people that you know are funding education initiatives. When I was a teacher, I had very little time to really think about how I was using data because I was so busy doing all the other crap that was being asked of me constantly. Paperwork, lesson plans, having parent-teacher conferences. It's exhausting to be a teacher. It's fun, but it's a lot of work. And it would have been wonderful to be able to sit down with a data analyst and talk about some of the issues I was struggling with in the classroom to get some of your thoughts. I keep saying this, but I want to keep saying it again. The collective wisdom in this room is brilliant. But it really doesn't do us as a society any good if we don't share it with each other. And that's why I'm so glad that this event is happening, because this is kind of the first step, with all of you coming together to connect, to talk about the practices that you do. But when this is done, I want you to go out and find other people who don't do data analysis on a regular basis but could benefit from it, and share your practices with them. Because frankly, that's the only way I see us improving the education system, is when we find something that works or we have an idea that seems exciting and we want to share it with each other. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't give you my own contact information, because I am also in this space right now. When I first started at Google and they told me I was going to be building a data dashboard, I went, why did you hire me? Because that's not my specialty. But at the same time, maybe it's not such a bad thing, because I've been on the edge of the consumer, and I've been in a journalistic role where I've had to learn about data and kind of try to process it on my own. So maybe if I'm taking the viewpoint of a consumer, then it's not such a bad thing to be the builder, because I'll be thinking about the people that are using it. But again, if there are people in this room that have ideas around how you measure social capital, about how you measure those soft skills, I want to hear it. And if you're not even sure, but you want to have a conversation, let's talk. Because as much as this talk may be helpful, I would love to have conversations with you individually about all of the other work in education that I've seen, that I've done, that I've experienced, so that maybe that will inspire you to go out and talk to someone else or come up with an interesting project. Thank you. So we have 10 minutes? 10 minutes? OK. So I will take a couple questions. I'll be honest with you. The Google Comms team was a little uncomfortable with me coming to this. So there's only so much I could probably say about certain Google stuff. But I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. I was a teacher, so I'm great at wait time.
Hey, coding is really great, but it also seems like data literacy and the kind of underlying concepts of how one might ask a question and acquire the data to answer it are equally important. How do you plan to teach those in Code Next?
That is a great question. And what's funny is that, so we have a curriculum team, mostly of former educators. And one of them is a math teacher. And when he came in, he basically said, you guys need to do a better job of teaching basic math and data skills before we even get to that point. So the way that the program works is that when kids come in during their freshman year, they're not going and doing HTML or Java or anything yet. We dedicate the first year of freshman year curriculum to data literacy, creative computing concepts, basic logic flow, and math that kids might have missed if they didn't get algebra in 8th grade. So that's sort of the approach that we take. And then we don't even put them really into an HTML coding environment until sophomore year. But the big issue that I see with things like code.org, for example, is that oftentimes they throw kids into a computing environment without actually thinking about where the gaps might be before that. I'll take your question one step further, which is that if I had 2 classes, other than computer science, if I had 2 classes that every school in America was required to teach, one would be data literacy, and the other one would be digital citizenship, which is the way we in education describe teaching kids how to be responsible consumers in digital environments, like how to be responsible on social media and create a good digital footprint. The problem is that because there aren't really standardized tests that test those things, it's hard to get that into the lexicon and get schools to get on the bandwagon. But there are some incredible edtech products out there I see doing this work. One is called Everfi up in Chicago. They actually have a data and digital literacy platform, and some schools actually pay money for the kids to be able to take the course. And it's a good course. If you're curious in looking that up, it's Everfi, Ever, and Fi. So I'm a big fan of theirs, but don't tell them I said that.
Hi, right, I'm over here. There you
Oh,
go.
hi.
Hi, I have a question. I work here in HR, and we fundamentally, I think, have the same problem because we were trying to measure the same thing. What is success,
Yeah.
and what does it look like? And so I feel with your struggles of what that looks like, and it can be arbitrary, and then you have to somehow try and quantify it. So that's the first comment. But the question that we try and take a look at is, and I think, well, first of all, in some of the questions that we have to frame, I mean, John Elder alluded to it this morning, the sort of socially acceptance behavior bias that occurs, right? Someone may leave the university or someone may leave, and I call it the potluck problems, like, well, why didn't you like my food? And you're asking that person to their face, and they're gonna be like, oh, they do a faux thing and say, oh, I'm full and I didn't eat, right? But we know that there may be something else going on. And so we're going towards this trajectory of trying to look at what we call more unambiguous data sets of like, what is the actual interaction model? And so, and you talked about the assessments, but those seem to be more the conclusions, but not necessarily the actual behavior that occurs. Has anyone taken a look at things like Edmodo and looking at how the interaction looks like? Like, for example, if there's one particular teacher who is like crushing it, is she or he, are they interacting more? Are they interacting less? What's the texturing look like within the actual interaction itself?
Sure, that's a great question. And I would venture to say that there's a more recent movement that's happened, especially in the K-12 space, called social emotional learning, where companies are attempting to track some of the, like you said, like student-teacher interactions, the way the kids are interacting with each other, and seeing if that correlates to success, i.e. graduation rates, credit completion grades, stuff like that. So I've seen companies that are attempting to figure that out. There's a company that comes to mind in the Bay called Sown to Grow, where teachers are actually taking down sort of basic notes while they're in class, tracking like student behavior. And I haven't seen so much products where it's tracking like how the teacher is moving. I mean, there have definitely, since the beginning of teaching, there's always been ways that people have tried to assess how teachers are actually doing. I mean, I used to get observed all the time by my principal, and there are some products out there like Teaching Channel where you can actually upload a video of yourself teaching and someone can tell you how you're doing. But the problem is that there seems to be a disconnect between those videos or those pieces of data or information and the actual student success piece. And I think part of the reason is because they're seen in two fundamental different spaces. One is teacher professional development, and the other one is student social emotional learning. Now, funders don't necessarily want to fund either of those things because they're harder to scale, but there are certain companies like Facebook, for example, who are trying to figure out if there's ways that they can essentially track more specific connections between teacher behavior and what the students are learning. In fact, do any of you know about Facebook's investment in Summit Public Schools? Yeah. Mark Zuckerberg has recently gotten involved. Chan Zuckerberg, right. So Chan Zuckerberg, which is the foundation that Mark and Priscilla have tried to put some money into that space. But whether we're going to see the returns on it immediately, my guess is probably not. But it's a good question that you bring up. And I think this is part of the reason why we're struggling with this right now is because there's just not a lot of versions of it out there. I mean, even looking at all of the other education initiatives within Google, there's not a lot of connection between the behavior of the student or the teacher and their success. So it's a lot more based on this because this is easier to track. It is. But all the more reason why I'm in this work and why you're in this work so we can figure it out. And we should get a drink later because it's really hard, and we could probably bond over that. Yes? Oh, I love Bebot. Second Life, that's the one where you create a version of yourself? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So Bbot, for those of you that don't know, is a coding tool where little kids, like very little kids, basically input simple commands, and a little robotic bee moves around based on what they put in. And stuff like that is, I think, great because it is introducing them to basic concepts of logic and flow and inputting instructions into a machine. So I think Bbot is great. Second Life, how do I feel about Second Life? I keep thinking about this documentary that I saw about Second Life where the people got so into Second Life that they kind of like forgot their first life and then just got so distracted by Second Life that they kind of lost their first life. Anything that puts students in an environment that makes it easier for them to learn, I'm a big fan of. What I'm not a big fan of is putting students on platforms for 90% of the day. That's the only thing that concerns me about something like Second Life. Because I could see a student getting so sucked into that they become disconnected from reality. I also don't really see teachers using it, in my experience. It's interesting, though, to hear that you have seen it being used, because I'm wondering what the education implications of that are. We should talk more after this. That is true, and that's, you know what, that's one of the reasons I love Minecraft. Do any of you have kids that do Minecraft? I love Minecraft because it's a safe online digital environment where kids can build and they can interact, and it's great. Minecraft has become so popular because it's basically somewhere in between a video game and an online learning environment. So in that way, yes, I could see the positive implications of that. But to go back to Bbot for a second, you know, I think that there's really easy ways to introduce these concepts into education without making schools and districts feel like they have to say no to other stuff. The big thing I always used to hear was, well, I mean, we could do more computer science education, but what are we going to get rid of? You want to get rid of math? You want to get rid of language arts? You want to get rid of science? And I think the answer is no, but you can figure out ways to blend the two together. Like, I've seen some incredible examples of math teachers teaching logic with computer science. It takes a little bit more work, but I frankly think it pays off in dividends. So, great questions. All right, I think I have time for one more question. Oh, God. Phil, is it going to be you?
Yeah, watch out.
Oh, Lord. All right, well, thanks, everybody. It was really fun.
You did.
Oh, they actually thought I was leaving.
I do actually have a question. So you didn't really imply it this way, but it could be stated this way, in that, you know, the sort of opposite to standardized testing is the notion of precision, that you treat every child as a very precise and separate entity. And, you know, we obviously have, in principle, data that allows us to facilitate that kind of analysis. And I was thinking about parallels where it does happen. So the whole precision medicine initiative now is exactly aimed at that kind of thing. And that involves significant participation by the participants and the patients themselves. And you can imagine that you have school kids with parents who would be really willing to share data in a controlled way into these kinds of systems that create more precise learning goals and every imaginable thing associated with it. Is that happening at scale anywhere?
So I think that's a really interesting question because I have two separate answers to that. One, I do think that some of these tech products are trying to get to a point where they can do precision assessment. So the big problem that I've been witnessing recently, and some of you may have read about this in the media, is that getting parents on board is a lot harder for both tech companies and districts than I think people originally thought. And so, you know, when it comes to precision data, it helps to have intricate information about the students to be able to track it to. And like in the state of New York, for example, there's this one particular parent who shall remain nameless, who has led this huge initiative to basically get schools and districts to stop using platforms that collect any data, because she doesn't like the idea of that data living anywhere and being consumed by any third-party vendors. That's, I think, the bigger concern is the schools and districts don't have the capacity to do this, so they have to bring in third-party vendors to be able to handle something as intricate as that process. There's a lot of I think precision medicine is brilliant. Having a mom who was in nursing for 25 years, I mean, she's talked to me about it too. But education is a little bit challenging because you're not just talking about the owner of the data, which is theoretically, well, that's a question. The big debate right now in education is who actually owns the data. Does the school own it? Does a third-party vendor own it? Do the parents own it? I personally think the student should own it, but if you have a student who's 7 years old, are they really able to make the shots about whether they should, allow their data to be put into a machine and spit out something? Yeah. I think that I honestly, I've sent a couple of articles about precision medicine to friends of mine in the Bay, and the answer that I typically get back from them is, this is a beautiful ideal. Let's see if it happens in 50 years. But, like I said before, diehard skeptic, but very much an optimist. So keeping my fingers crossed, because I will tell you, I could not, as a teacher, track and process every single piece of data that I had. It was also exhausting to make my own learning goals on a regular basis. So having something that would help spit that out for me would be wonderful. So we'll see what happens. And the interoperability piece is a non-negotiable for that, definitely. All right, well, it has been wonderful talking to you. I will be walking around in my PowerGo pantsuit for the next 4 hours. This is also the second time I've worn this, just so everybody knows. Like you probably guessed, Silicon Valley does not typically frequent these types of outfits. So I was happy to be able to share it with you. But if you have any questions, any more questions, or anything you'd like to chat about, I'll be here. Aww. Thank you.
Turn your mic off.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you. Awesome. Before everybody starts standing up, I've got a few announcements if you can hold tight for just a second. Thank you again to Mary Jo. Fantastic, fantastic keynote. We are going to be moving into the second half of the day, and this is the part where we're going to split up. So I want to make sure everybody knows kind of what's going on and where we're going. First, I will tell you we have about a 15-minute break, about a 12-minute break. There is fresh coffee available in the Kaleidoscope room, which is out here to the left. As you go out the doors to the left, please do feel free to go in there and get some coffee. But the breakout sessions begin at 1:15, and both of them are out the doors to the right. So in the south meeting room at 1:15, there's going to be a panel moderated by Don Brown on social media analytics. And then down the hall, so you go out and to the right and around the corner, in the Commonwealth room, there's a panel moderated by Eric Field on data visualization. Those will take place from 1:15 to 2:15. And then 2:30 to 3:30, we've got healthcare analytics and business analytics before we all come back here together to hear from Chris Wiggins as our closing keynote this afternoon. So please take some time. Don't forget to keep connecting with one another. The data visualization is still up and running. So find those numbers, make those connections. And please, again, help yourselves to coffee and make your way to the panels. We do want to get started on time. Thanks.